everyone. Thanks for asking me back. It's so lovely to be here. Heston's asked me to speak about two things today and over the next 3 weeks as well. One of those things is the stuff that I work on at Larger Us, which is an organisation that I set up 7 years ago and still run now. What our work is all about is supporting change makers to do their work in ways that bridge divides, that bring people together, and that build broader coalitions for change. And we'll get into some more of that later on. But the other thing that Heston asked me to talk about is apocalypses. I also write a Substack called the Good Apocalypse Guide. And I've kind of been into the idea of apocalypses since I was very little. Growing up in the 1980s, under the shadow of kind of, Russia and America saber-rattling nuclear weapons against each other. It was quite an apocalyptic time, and I spent a lot of energy when I was about 8 or 9 building a survival kit with things like a kind of whistle and a fishing line and a compass, apparently under the impression that this would be useful in a nuclear winter. And then as I grew up, I never really got past this. My wife still teases me about the time when, during the financial crisis in 2008, I rushed out and panic bought all these bags of red lentils, which were still kicking around in our basement years later when we moved out. But the thing is that as the years have gone by, this has started to seem less like a kind of, daft obsession of mine, and more like a pretty rational response to the times we're living in. I mean, we've gone through a pandemic, we're living through climate breakdown, there's the absolute state of our politics with democracies in crisis all over the world, there's nuclear proliferation, the risk of great powers going to war against each other. These are pretty overwhelming times. And if you look at the rate of mentions of the word apocalypse in books, they're 6 times higher now than they were in 1960, and the highest they've been for 200 years. So this stuff is on our minds at some level. But the thing I'm here to say today is that we have apocalypses all wrong. They can be much more hopeful and creative and energizing than we've been led to believe. If you listen to Hollywood, or read post-apocalyptic fiction, as I like to do in quiet moments, it's this very depressing view of us. What happens when you have a massive disaster is you have immediate, total breakdown of law and order. There's kind of mass looting, it's everyone for themselves, and that's how things stay until someone imposes martial law and the army move in. Now, the interesting thing is that if you look at the field of disaster sociology, which it turns out is a whole area of study, this is the exact opposite of what happens in the wake of shocks or disasters. What you actually see in those moments is extraordinary solidarity, particularly in the first 24 hours before the International Red Cross and the United Nations turn up. People show up for each other. They absolutely rise to the moment and often display extraordinary heroism. And the other thing is that actually the word apocalypse doesn't even mean the end of the world, although that's what we keep being told. It means something much more interesting than that. It means an unveiling or a revelation, a disclosure of things as they really are. And in that sense, I think COVID, to take an example, was an apocalypse. It showed us who the real key workers are in society. It showed us all kinds of prejudice and inequality that we'd looked away from for too long. And it showed us how much the thing that makes life worth living is our connection to each other. And that when the chips are down, that's the thing we really yearn for. The other thing that I find fascinating about apocalypses is that all through history, there are moments where we incubate new futures. If you look at some of our most confusing and turbulent times through history, they're times when new things have been born. Think of how you had the Black Death in Europe in the 14th century. A third of the population died, but it was also the moment that seeded things like the Renaissance and the Reformation. If you look at China's Warring States period further back, 900 years of total chaos, but also the soil from which Taoism and Confucianism sprung. Look at World War II and the Holocaust and the first use of nuclear weapons and how that also gave us the United Nations and the idea of universal human rights. So I think there's something really interesting in apocalyptic moments, that they can lead to breakdown, to collapse, to things unraveling. But they can also do the opposite. They can be moments of breakthrough, where we show up for each other and sort of something new and beautiful gets born. And I'm really interested in what tips the balance between the two. Now, I'm an old kind of policy wonk, and I used to think, nerd that I am, that the thing that tipped the balance was basically what politicians did and the kind of policies that were deployed in those moments. But I've come to think, and this is what Larger Us's work is all about, that the real place where the balance gets tipped is right here in each one of us. What we work on at Larger Us is the interplay between our states of mind on the one hand and the state of the world on the other. And there's three ways that those two sets of states are linked. Now, one is one that we're all familiar with, the way the state of the world affects our states of mind. And there's so many examples we can think of. If we're living in poverty, if we're the victim of prejudice every day, if we're living in a pandemic, these are things, of course, that affect our states of mind and our mental health. So that's the first one, how the state of the world affects our states of mind. Secondly, our states of mind affect each other through this fascinating thing called social contagion, which is a jargony word, but you all have experienced it. Have you ever been in that situation where someone starts yawning, and then someone else starts yawning, and before you know it, everyone's yawning? That is social contagion. Or when someone starts giggling, and it's infectious, that's social contagion too. But this is also true of much bigger emotions. Look at how things like panic can be infectious, but brighter emotions can be hopeful too. Things like hope or joy. So that's the second dynamic, how our states of mind affect each other. And the third one, finally, is how our states of mind for each one of us affect the state of the world. And this is the really important one when we look at politics and society. Because how we feel in here affects and determines how we show up as citizens. If we feel terrified, enraged, hopeless, then of course we're going to show up in ways that increase division in our society. If we feel hopeful and confident and feel joy and love for each other, we're going to show up completely differently. So that, I think, is the pivot that's going to determine whether the turbulent times we're living through are the kind of apocalypse that leads to breakthrough or breakdown. And the one thought that I want to leave you with today is that there are two different playbooks, a breakdown playbook and a breakthrough playbook, that are really going to determine which way we go. Now, the breakdown playbook is the one that we keep seeing from far-right populists, people like Donald Trump, Nigel Farage, Marine Le Pen, and all of the rest of them. These guys are brilliant at inflaming our states of mind in ways that push us towards breakdown. They kind of feed on our sense of threat and danger and turn that into kind of anxiety and fight, flight, freeze responses. They prey on loneliness by offering a warped kind of belonging that's based on who's excluded. They sow division and othering and scapegoating. They prey on feelings of loss as a source of grievance. And they're very good at telling resonant stories, especially about a threatening other. And this playbook has real psychological depth to it. And they're very good at turning that into political impact, as we keep seeing in the world. So to make things a bit more hopeful, what would it look like if we had the opposite kind of playbook? The kind of playbook that brings us together instead of dividing us. What would that look like? Well, I think we would take those things and just turn them on their head. And this is what we're going to be exploring over the next 4 weeks. Imagine if, when things get threatening, instead of going into that fight, flight, freeze state, we have the ability to steady ourselves and make a conscious choice about how to respond. Imagine if instead of loneliness, we feel belonging and like we're valued and seen just as we are. Imagine if instead of division and othering, we recognize the things that we share with each other, the more in common than that which divides us. Imagine if, when we experience shared loss in communities, instead of that leading to grievance, it leads to healthy kind of mourning and grieving and lament. And imagine if the deep stories that we share are not stories about threat, collapse, the other, but are instead stories of connection and hope and joy. When we have those kinds of things, of course it's great for our states of mind and our mental health. It's great for our relationships, but it's also great for the communities and the democracy that we live in. Our politics depends on our being able to kind of manage our mental states and feel connection with each other and share these hopeful, deep stories. What I think it does when we share those things is it turns us into a larger us rather than a them and us. A larger us rather than just an atomized, lonely I, and a larger us in the sense of having broader circles of compassion. So I think this can be a good apocalypse. The kind that births something new and hopeful and beautiful. And I think the thing that tips the balance towards that apocalypse starts inside us. And that's what we're going to be exploring over the next 4 weeks. Thank you again for inviting me to be with you today.